Hi, I'm Janet Jacobs, and I want to thank you, judges, students, and faculty, for taking the time to view this presentation. My poster is about food in the American Civil War. In reading hundreds of Civil War letters, I found they almost all had some reference to food. Based on that, I looked at what food accomplished in terms of fostering relationships, creating identity, and changing attitudes about gender and race. For men who had seldom traveled far from home, whether drafted from the crowded boroughs of New York or volunteers from the farms of the Midwest or the Texas plains, eating a familiar dish allowed them a few minutes of remembering what it felt like to be home, surrounded by family and security. In this image, a guard cooks his Christmas dinner over a small fire while on picket. Holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas were particularly lonely times for soldiers, but families mailed them boxes of produce, baked goods, and even butter and cheese, nurturing and supporting through the language of food. In return for those gifts from wives, sweethearts, and mothers, soldiers would have formal portraits taken, such as these. What is unusual about this tintype is that it shows a soldier sitting cross-legged as he might in camp, with his knife and fork ready to eat an apple. Civil War letters often state "I'm eating" or describe what a man had for breakfast or supper. In this reassuring way, they are also saying, "I'm healthy, I'm alive." My research also delved into how men traded across lines. It may seem odd that warring factions would do business together, but cotton was an important part of the Union's economy, both for domestic mills and in foreign trade for British and European mills. Individual soldiers also traded across lines, swapping northern coffee for southern tobacco. In this image, pickets or guards meet up to trade those commodities. This is another image of these kinds of trades. It's important to remember that in the process of trading, they also forged relationships and even shared information, which is why both sides had rules against it. Food preparation also changed attitudes during the war. Most 19th century men did not know how to cook prior to joining the Army because it was such a gendered duty in American homes. What they discovered was that it was harder than it looked, and good cooks were rewarded with better assignments, often far from the battlefronts. In that same vein, contrabands, or African American freed slaves, gained protection and pay as cooks and servants in Union camps. Many of these contrabands were very young. In this photo, a small child holds both a sword and a cup and saucer, indicating the twin duties he performed for the officer in the tent behind him. Some free African Americans volunteered to cook in order to get closer to the action, where they could be more effective in the fight against slavery. One of those volunteers was Harriet Tubman, who spied for the Union by taking information from slaves to Union officers. On paper, her job was as a cook and a nurse. Another example is William Henry Johnson, who later became a successful New York businessman and legislator. As a free man of color, he tried enlisting at the start of the war, but was rejected, so he volunteered to cook for the Connecticut 2nd Regiment. It was through his popularity as a cook that he gained status and respect, and was eventually able to help rescue escaped slaves, even defying his own officers to do so. In the Civil War, soldiers slept and ate with a mess, a group of 4 to 8 other men. In sharing the work, in sharing the meals, they built strong unit cohesion through a surrogate family. This translated well into battle situations. James McPherson's study for Cause and Comrades of why men fought in the Civil War points out that men may have joined out of national loyalty, but they stayed in the fight for their brothers in arms. That unit cohesion began with eating and cooking together. In the South, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman is infamous as the man who supposedly ravaged the countryside, pillaging and burning every city he found. Actually, he cut a fairly narrow path about 60 miles wide between Atlanta and Savannah, and then through the Carolinas. Significantly, Sherman did tell his men to forage liberally, giving them license to take from the farms along the way in a dual attempt to feed his army of 60,000 men, but also to send a clear message to the enemy that they must surrender or starve. Throughout the war, food was a means of communication, of forging relationships, and of building identities and status. Although the American Civil War has been studied in hundreds, even thousands of ways, I argue that food is a useful lens through which we can gain new insight into this conflict while also learning more about ourselves and our current society. Again, I thank you for your time and your attention.